Very sad day. Now Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo. Remember I showed you this picture last week. Of course it doesn't work. I showed you this picture of last week of the view from Mount Nebo. If you pan around, that's looking south toward the Dead Sea, toward Jerusalem actually. If you went straight ahead, Jerusalem is in that direction. 25 miles from that spot right there. But Moses goes up Mount Nebo to look at the land, and then he dies. Moses went up from the plains of Moab. He was down below here with the children of Israel, ready to cross the Jordan River, which is right here, to go to Jericho, which is right here. In the plains of Moab, all these 2 million Jews were, or more, were settled there, ready to cross the river. And God calls Moses, his servant, up onto this mountain peak. To the top of Pisgah, it says, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed Moses all the land. And then he describes some of the land, at least gives names. Gilead as far as Dan. So the northern part, the eastern and northern part of the land. And all of Naphtali, the area around the Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus spent most of his time. And the land of Ephraim and Manasseh. And all the land of Judah as far as the western sea. That's the southern part of Israel, the land of Judah. The Negev and the plain in the valley of Jericho. The Negev is the desert in southern Jerusalem. And Jericho, the city of palms, is right across the river there. You can see it in the picture. The city of palm trees as far as Zoar. So God gave Moses a supernatural glimpse of the promised land. It would have looked differently than it does there because at that time the land wasn't left desolate. Israel had not disobeyed and gone into rampant idolatry. This was a land flowing with milk and honey. If we were Moses looking across the plains of Moab to Jericho there, it would have been a very different, very, very, much greener, much more lush. The river Jordan would have been much bigger than that little trifling river that it is now after all the irrigation and stuff. It's about as wide as from here to that door right there in most places, the river Jordan today. Very narrow, more of a creek. We'd call it a creek, not a river. But Moses got to see it. He got to see the promised land. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land which I swore to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob." Abraham came 500 years earlier. But this is the land that 500 years earlier God had promised to Abraham, and then again to his son Isaac, and then again to Isaac's son Jacob. And he said, "I will give this land to your descendants." And he speaks to Moses and he said, "I've let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there." Moses never set as much as 1 foot in the promised land, not yet. But mortal Moses, during his life, never stepped foot in the promised land. What a tragedy for Moses. Where did God, just because I want to get a little historical background here, where did God swear to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would give them this land? He mentions it here. We got to go back just for a couple of verses just to see it. The fact that this is true, God did promise this land to Abraham, even before he changed his name from Abram to Abraham. He promised him this land. Look what it says in Genesis chapter 13, verse 12, a book written by Moses. It says, Abraham settled in the land of Canaan, the promised land, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. I'd love to make a lot of comments about that, but I can't. Abraham settled in the land of Canaan. Look what it says in Genesis 13, 14, right after that, the very next verse. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him. Lot was Abraham's nephew. And this is what God has to say to Abram. Lift up your eyes. It's very similar to what God just told Moses to do. Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. If you want to know who owns that land that Israel is settled in now in the Middle East, read that verse right there and let it be settled in your heart. Not the Palestinians, not the Arabs, not the Muslims. This land belongs to Israel, and it always will. I'll give it to you and to your descendants forever. Not until you refuse Messiah, not until you reject Jesus Christ. And then I'm going to pull all the promises from you, Abraham, and I'm going to transfer them to the church. The Bible doesn't say that, not even close. It uses the word olam, it uses the word forever. I'll give it to you and your descendants forever. I'll make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants, the Jews, remember Abraham is the first Hebrew man, then your descendants can also be numbered. If you could count every grain of dust on the earth, then we'd know how many Jews there are. And he tells them, arise now. This is what he didn't tell Moses. Look at the difference. To Moses, he says, you will not go over there. To Abraham, he says, arise, walk about the land through its length and its breadth, for I will give it to you. And I know Moses would have loved to have stepped foot in that land. He pled with God earlier in the book of Deuteronomy to let me go into the land, and the Lord said no. So there are the promises. Go back to verse 5 in Deuteronomy 34. So Moses, being the obedient servant that he is, so Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he, look at what happens to the body of Moses, and he buried him. Yahweh performs the burial of Moses. Imagine that. A dead human being buried by God himself. That's exactly what happened with Moses. And Yahweh buried Moses in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no man knows his burial place to this day. The burial of Moses was an event that Yahweh took care of himself. It was a secret to men. Moses was on Mount Nebo alone. But we do see from a New Testament verse that I'm about to show you that angels were involved in this event. Look what it says in Jude chapter 9 concerning the body of Moses and what happened. Who might you think would be there when the great Moses climbs Mount Nebo to speak to God and to see the land one last time and die? Maybe Satan sent someone. Look at what it says in Jude chapter 9. Concerning how it is that Yahweh buried Moses up on the hill. It says in Jude, not chapter 9, Jude verse 9, it's only a one chapter book. But Michael the archangel, Michael the archangel, when he disputed with the devil, who's the devil? Satan. So who was on Mount Nebo that day? I tell you in every page of this Bible, don't count Satan out. Michael the archangel, when he disputed with the devil and argued about the body of Moses, did not dare pronounce against him a railing judgment, but said, the Lord rebuke you. So here in Jude 9, we have this understanding that when Moses was being buried, Michael the archangel was present, and so was Satan himself. There's more to the story than we read in Deuteronomy chapter 34. There was a fight for the body of Moses. I wonder what Satan wanted to do to it. Yeah, interesting question. But there was a dispute for the body of Moses, and Michael the archangel won. Yahweh buried Moses on Mount Nebo. His body has never been found. No man, according to what the Bible says, no man knows where God tucked Moses away in the cleft of a rock up on Mount Nebo. Verse 7 continues, although Moses was 120 years old when he died, his eye was not dim, nor his vigor abated. He was a strong and healthy man on the day he climbed up that mountain. He didn't go up the mountain with a walker. He didn't go up with thick glasses. The man could see well. He had strength. He had vigor. He had more life to live that he could have lived physically, but the Lord said, today is the day. So Moses, in full health, with full strength of body, his life was taken from him on that day. Verse 8, what was the response of Israel when Moses didn't come down off the mountain? And certainly Moses would have told him. He was told by Yahweh, you're going to climb the mountain and see the land, and you're going to die there. You're going to be gathered to your fathers, he told him. Moses would have told the people, I'm going up the mountain to die. And so the sons of Israel wept for Moses. I remember, nobody knows where the body is. It's not because they found Moses dead that they're weeping. They're weeping because Moses had pre-warned them that he wasn't coming down off that hill. So the sons of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. The great leader Moses. Then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses came to an end. Well, Moses is gone, and now we have to have a new commander. And who's the man that steps in? But Joshua, the leader of Israel, the man that Yahweh told Moses to commission for the job that he was about to do. What was the job that Joshua was tasked with? We looked at this a couple of weeks ago. 3 things. He was to lead Israel across the Jordan River, finally into the promised land. That's number 1. Lead Israel into the promised land. Number 2, defeat Yahweh's enemies in the land. Everything that breathes, kill it. And number 3, he was to apportion the land. Once they made conquest, once they defeated all the enemies of Yahweh in the land of Canaan, Joshua was to oversee the apportioning of the land. Pass it out properly to the tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, so they'll know exactly the land that I have given them to live in. So Joshua is in control now. In verse 9 it says, Now Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. And the sons of Israel listened to him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. The Lord commanded Moses to commission Joshua. God himself commissioned Joshua. And now Joshua has been transferred the power of Israel. The authority in Israel is now in Joshua's hand. There is a higher authority in Israel still. Who would you think that is? Who? God, yes, for sure. But the high priest, the priesthood in Israel, I mean, a king couldn't be king unless the priest anointed him. The priest went first. The relationship to God was more important even than their political leader. I'll fast forward to another story, and I'll prove that point. When King Saul, the first king of Israel, was waiting to go into battle, Samuel told him, don't do anything until I get there. Samuel, the man of God, the worship leader. And Saul jumped the gun because he's looking at his watch and saying, where's Sam? He hasn't come. Maybe he's not coming. I need to lead these men in battle. And Israel lost horribly in that battle. And Samuel showed up and said, I told you I had to come first. The priest, the high priest, was the high authority in Israel. Jesus Christ, being not only the king of Israel, but a prophet and also a priest also, has all the authority in Israel, all the high offices of Israel. So in verse 10, to keep going, the final words about Moses. Moses. We're going to take a look back at Moses for the rest of our time here this morning, but look at the final words about this man, Moses. Since that time, 1500 BC, since those days of Moses, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses. Not Isaiah, not the great prophet Isaiah, not the weeping prophet Jeremiah, not the Son of Man prophet Ezekiel. No prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, not even the great Daniel, the leader of Israel, the prophet. No one has had a relationship with Yahweh like Moses' relationship with Yahweh, whom the Lord knew face to face in an intimate way. We'll see in a verse at the end of this, without dark sayings. He spoke to Moses plainly as a man would speak to his friend. He visited Moses. Remember, Yahweh would visit Moses and speak to Moses in the tent of meeting, so much so that when Moses came out, his face shined or shone. I mean, he had an intimate relationship with this man Moses. This man Moses, when you go to put him in order in the Bible, this man is way up at the top if he's not at the top. No prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. For all the signs and wonders, look at what God did through Moses. For all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh. I mean, what a man that you send in to Pharaoh to say, let my people go. What a man this Moses was. Not only Pharaoh, but Pharaoh's servants and all his land, the land of Egypt. Verse 12 continues, for all the mighty power and for all the great terror which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. There's never been a man like Moses in Israel. And if there's never been a man like Moses in Israel, and Israel's the top nation in the world, there simply has never been a man like Moses on the earth. And this is the end of Moses' writings in the Bible. There's one other thing that Moses wrote in the Bible. Can anybody name it? He didn't only write the first 5 verses of the Bible. He wrote something else. Psalm 90. A prayer of Moses, the man of God. Psalm 90. Psalm 90, some of you, everybody knows the song, I'll Fly Away. And it's in Psalm 90 that Moses says, the days of our lives are 70 years. And if by reason of strength they are 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. Psalm 90, the only other writing of Moses in the book. But we've gone through Genesis and Exodus. Moses also wrote Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. These 5 books of the Bible, according to the Jews, are known as Torah, T-O-R-A-H. The law, the instruction, the teaching is what Torah actually means, Torah. These 5 books are also called the Pentateuch in a Greek word, Pentateuch, Penta, P-E-N-T-E, T-E-U-C-E. The 5 books is what Pentateuch means, the 5 books. So Penta, P-E-N-T-E, is a prefix, it means 5. So we're done with Moses, and I'm sorry to leave him because I love this guy. Again, my list. You know the list I'm referring to, Moses. I can't wait to see Moses and meet this great man of faith. Moses wrote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and then, as we just saw, he climbed up onto Mount Moab. He had one final meeting as a mortal man with Yahweh on Mount Moab, having never stepped foot in the promised land, the land of Canaan. And Moses was gathered to his fathers up on the mountain. But as I said, before we leave Moses, and I don't have a ton of time to do this, I just want to go through some highlights of this man's life. The Bible says there's never arisen in Israel a man like Moses. Look at what we're about to see here, just some highlights. Look at everything God did with Moses and through Moses for the people Israel and for the whole world. Moses, top billing. Moses, I just don't know what else to say about him. There's never been a man like Moses. Before we get into what Moses did, just quickly, some of you like this kind of stuff. I do. Just a quick timeline from Abraham to Moses. Remember, Abraham was the first Jew, and we can date Abraham and Jacob and his 11 sons moving to Egypt in about 1876. That's a really good number. Jacob and his 11 sons. Remember, it was Abraham, the first Jew. Abraham had a son named Isaac. Isaac had a son named Jacob. And it was Jacob's 12 sons that make up the 12 tribes of Israel. Why don't I say 12 sons there? Why 11 sons? Jacob and 11 sons moved to Egypt. Where's the 12th? He's already in Egypt. He's Joseph. He's the top dog, the second in command in Egypt. That's why he's not there. So 1876 is a good number for him. And look how many years go by before Moses is born. Moses isn't born until 1526. We get that from Exodus chapter 2. He's born around, give or take 2 or 3 years. It doesn't matter, but he's born circa 1526. This is Moses' birth date. Moses born in Egypt. So Israel has been in Egypt for these 350 years already when Moses comes along. We see more facts as they come in here. In Exodus chapter 3, we see of the burning bush, and we'll see that in just a minute. 40 years after Moses is 80 years old at the burning bush. He's 80 years old. And just this is an old slide, so there's a couple of things on here. Thutmose III was the oppressor of Israel. The Pharaoh who oppressed Israel, those are his years. And Amenhotep was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, whose son died the night of the 10th plague. That's a brief timeline. 1876 is when the Egyptian event began, and 350 years go by before Moses is born. So they're in Egypt a long time. Who is Moses according to ancestry? I mean, whose son is he? Look at from Abraham. We mentioned Abraham. You see Abraham, the first Jew. Abraham's father, Nahor, was not a Jew. He wasn't a Hebrew. Abraham is the first Jewish man called by God to be the leader of a new race of people whom God would save the world through and send Jesus Christ through. So we have Abraham, we have his son Isaac, we have his son Jacob. Remember, Jacob has 12 sons. The third of those was named Levi. Levi has 3 sons, and these are them, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And it's Levi's son Kohath that Moses and Aaron come through. And Kohath has children, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. It's Amram, the line that Moses comes through according to the Scripture. This is all very easily traced in the book of Genesis. And then after that, Amram, the father of Aaron and Moses. Moses' brother must have been Nahor, his brother Lot's father. Anyway, there you have it, just briefly. I want to make a couple of facts. I want to just state a few things about Moses in the time we have left. Who is this Moses, the greatest of all the prophets of Israel? Look what it says in Exodus chapter 1, verse 22 concerning Moses' birth. Remember, Moses was born during a time when Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, wanted all the Jewish sons to be drowned in the Nile River. This is when God chooses, because God does, listen to this fact, a very comforting fact, because God does whatever He wants to do, whenever He wants to do it. It was during a time when Pharaoh had caused an edict or given an edict in the land of Egypt and said, every son who is born, every Jewish Hebrew son who is born, you are to cast into the Nile, drown him in the river, and every daughter you are to keep alive. You would think that during this political event, when the politician of the day said, kill all Jewish boys, that God wouldn't send the greatest prophet Israel ever knew onto the earth at that time. Yet that's exactly what He did, because He can't be stopped. It was during this time that Moses was born. And because of this edict to throw every kid into the Nile, this is what we read about in Hebrews 11, verse 13, the hall of faith. By faith Moses, by faith Abraham. This is what it says. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. What was the king's edict? Kill all the Hebrew sons in the Nile River. But Moses is born during this time. I'm telling you, of all times, Lord, why at this time? It's because God can do whatever He wants. When we find ourselves, and we do sometimes, in circumstances that seem insurmountable, too big for us to do anything with, Remember how God brought his great prophet Moses into the world? At a time when the politicians said, kill him, God said, no, I'll keep him perfectly preserved. Watch how I do it. I'll even put him in Pharaoh's house because I am God and no one else is. Watch me work. I love this God. I love the way he does things. Look what it says in Exodus chapter 2, verse 5 and 6. It was Pharaoh who said, kill all the Jewish sons, and it was Pharaoh's daughter who said, Daddy, not this one. Astounding. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile with her maidens walking alongside the Nile. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her maid, and she brought it to her. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on Moses, on the little baby, and she said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Can you imagine being Pharaoh, having said every Hebrew son will die, and your daughter bringing you a Jewish baby and saying, look what I found, Daddy. I'm going to raise him in your house. You're going to feed him. You're going to house him. You're going to educate him because God rules. She didn't know what she was doing. She had an emotional attachment to this beautiful little crying baby. God knew what he was doing. And so Moses comes into the world at a time when he shouldn't have been able to. Because God does what he does whenever he wants to do it. Politicians notwithstanding. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's house. In Pharaoh's palace, Moses grew up. And for many years in Moses' life, his fellow Jews, while he's growing up in opulence in the palace, his fellow Jews were enslaved by Pharaoh and things were getting worse and worse and worse for them. In Acts chapter 7, verse 23, we read of an account. Stephen is recalling the history of Egypt, of Israel and Egypt, and this is what he says concerning Moses. He said, but when he was approaching the age of 40, so Moses grew up in the opulent Pharaoh's palace for 40 years. When he was approaching the age of 40, it entered his mind to visit his brethren, the sons of Israel. See, he didn't grow up as a Jew. He grew up in the palace. But he wanted to go see the sons of Israel. And when he saw one of them being treated unjustly, Moses defended the Jew, and he took vengeance for the oppressed by striking down the Egyptian. Moses killed an Egyptian defending the Jews. Why did he do that? Because Moses thought that it was the proper time to free Israel. That's what Stephen brings out here. Moses supposed that his brethren, the Jews, understood that God was granting them deliverance through Moses, but they did not understand. Moses thought Israel was going to say, great, you're here to save us from slavery, but it was the wrong time. It was the wrong time. And so we see Moses leave Egypt. Remember, Moses grows up. He's in Pharaoh's house 40 years. He kills an Egyptian. The Bible says in Exodus chapter 2, verse 15, when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. So what does Moses do? It says, but Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So at age 40, Moses flees Egypt, running for his life, and he ends up by a well in the land of Midian. And you can read the story of how he met his wife there at the well in Midian. Acts chapter 7, fast forwarding in Moses' life, it says, after 40 years had passed. So how old is Moses now? 80. 40 years he's in the land of Midian. I'm showing you these things not to tell a story, but to show you everything that God did for Moses to keep him alive because of the work he had Moses to do. All the things that Moses saw that no man will ever see, all the things that Moses heard, the face-to-face relationship as a mortal man. We'll have a face-to-face relationship with God for all eternity, but you don't right now. But Moses did. The unique man in the whole of the universe, the unique mortal man, aside from Jesus the Christ, the God-man, was this man Moses. Nobody got to behold what he beheld. Remember, it was Moses who said, Father, let me see your face. Show yourself to me. And we sing a song that has the phrase in it that we're kept in the cleft of the rock. Well, we get that from Moses as Moses' event when God said, you cannot see my face. No man can see my face and live. But I'll pass by and I'll cover you in the cleft of the rock until I've passed by. And then you can see me as I'm leaving. Nobody's ever seen that except for Moses. What a guy, what a man Moses was, that God would reveal all these things to him. After 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in the flame of a burning thorn bush. You know the story of the bush that burned but didn't burn, was on fire but wasn't consumed. Who's ever seen something like that except for Moses? No one. Who's ever spoken to God from the midst of a burning miraculous bush except for Moses? No one. But Moses was there. So a timeline quickly, just to show what we've seen. Moses was born, taken out of the Nile River by Pharaoh's daughter, Hatshepsut. We're pretty sure that's who she was. When he was 40 years old, Moses leaves the comforts of the palace and he kills an Egyptian taskmaster. Moses flees to Midian where he stays for 40 years. He's settled. He has a new life. Not in Pharaoh's palace. He has a new life as a shepherd for his father-in-law. He has a wife. He has children, 2 boys. And then after that, God speaks directly to Moses through a burning bush, a theophany, an appearance of God on earth. And what's the message for God? Son, I have a job for you. 80 years I have built you into the man you are. 80 years before God uses Moses. Get a grip on that. 80 years. And now God is ready to use Moses. Yahweh's message to Moses through the burning bush, it's time for Israel to be set free from Egypt. You're the man, Moses, that I have chosen, that I have built over 80 years to go into Pharaoh's palace and tell him, let my people go. It's time to move finally into the land that he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's time for Israel to no longer be slaves, but to be an independent nation in the land of Canaan. Again, we fast forward in Moses' life. God has to convince Moses because Moses reluctantly agrees to be Yahweh's spokesman before Pharaoh. Remember, I don't have a silver tongue. I'm slow of tongue. Blah, can you send anyone else? Moses tries at least 3 times, if not 4, to make God choose someone else. But God says, no, Moses, you are the one for this job. Spectacular man, Moses. God brings 10 plagues. Remember what we saw earlier? There's no prophet has arisen like Moses for all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt. And those signs and wonders in the land of Egypt were 10 plagues. 10 plagues over the gods of Egypt. One by one, God knocked off a god that Egypt worshipped. One by one, over 10 plagues, God knocked off these false gods to convince Egypt and Pharaoh to release Israel. And who did he send in to do it? Moses. Moses was the point man. Moses was God's man for the job. The plagues are spectacular demonstrations. The plagues are spectacular demonstration of Yahweh's strength, Yahweh's power, Yahweh's control over everything in the universe. And at whose hands, by whose staff did all these plagues take place? Moses. Wow. Moses. You have to ask the question, how could Moses handle this? I mean, a man that God lifted up to do everything that God let Moses do, a man that God let see him face to face. And in Numbers chapter 12, we get the key to it all. Why Moses? Because the man Moses was very humble, more than any man who was on the face of the earth. Numbers chapter 12, verse 3. Why was Moses qualified? Is it because he was strong? Is it because he didn't take no for an answer? Is it because he had this political strength that he could command a room by his authority, by his personality? Was it because of that? Is that why God chooses men? No, it didn't have anything to do with that. Moses, by his own admission, said, I'm a man of a slow tongue. Why did God choose Moses? Humility. Because Moses was humble and Moses could be taught. Moses could lead Israel and not think, look at me. Look, everybody, look at me. Moses wanted you to look through him to see Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the deliverer. The deliverer. Another fantastic thing that Moses allowed, or that God allowed Moses to do, Moses exercised his faith in God. He had the joy of leading Israel in the worship of God. In Hebrews chapter 11, again to the hall of faith, in verse 28, this is what it says about Moses. By faith Moses kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them, the Israelites, the Jews. This man of faith had the joy of leading Israel in being the first on earth, the very first killing of an animal for this reason, a wonderful demonstration of the blood of Jesus Christ, our Passover lamb, according to the book of 2 Corinthians. Moses had the opportunity to teach Israel that by the sacrifice of a lamb and by the shedding of blood, a substitute can be made. The firstborn in the house won't die tonight. The lamb will stand in place of. The death of the lamb will stand in place of the death of the firstborn. And we have a perfect picture of the substitute death of Jesus Christ, who stood in our place so that we wouldn't have to die. Moses got to lead this. Moses got to take hyssop at his doorpost and his lintels and spread blood on it. I wonder if Moses went first. I wonder if Moses killed the first lamb and put the blood on his doorpost first. Wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me. After the 10 plagues, after this night, and the death angel comes through Egypt, the men are finally, or the people of Israel are finally let go. And they come upon a sea of reeds. According to the scripture, we read the Red Sea. Yam Suf means the sea of reeds. So after the 10 plagues, Israel is finally let go by Egypt, and they approach the sea of reeds, following Moses, of course, and this pillar of cloud. And Yahweh shows more strength by parting the sea and allowing Israel to cross over on dry ground. And who did Yahweh use? Moses. Whose staff was lifted up? Moses. Who did God use as a mouthpiece to show the brilliance of God and His power over all things, including the mighty Egyptian army? Moses. What a man. Moses said to the people, see, but the people are frantic, and we would be too. You've just left as slaves. All you've been as slaves all your life. You turn around and the strongest army on earth is approaching, and approaching quickly. And Moses steadies the people. He calms them with his words. Not his words about myself. I can win. I can lead. I can fight. There was no I in it. Do not fear. Stand by, Moses says, and see the salvation of Yahweh, which He will accomplish for you today. To be able to say those words, Moses. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. Moses. The things that Moses got to do. Look what it says in Psalm 106, verse 9 through 11. Thus God rebuked the Red Sea, the sea of reeds, and it dried up, and He led them through the deeps as through the wilderness. So He saved them from the hand of the one who hated them. That was Egypt and Pharaoh. And redeemed them from the hand of the enemy. The waters covered their adversaries, and not one of them was left. But who got to lead this? In humility, not I can fix this. There was no I in his mouth. Watch what Yahweh does for you today, Israel. Moses. How many were there? It must just have been a small band that he was leading. Really no big deal. He wasn't that big a leader. Look what it says in Exodus 12:37. The sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot. That's Egypt to out of Egypt. About 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. So how many do we have? That's where we get our number 1,000,000. You add a wife to each of these 600,000, you add at least a kid or two, you're at least at 2 million people. Easy. And not only did Moses lead Jews, but it also says a mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock. So Gentiles also left Egypt with Moses and the Jews, those whom the New Testament would call God-fearers. Those Gentiles who worshiped Yahweh as their God, understanding Him to be the one true God. So 3 months go by and we're coming to the end of this, but stick with me. Moses, what did God do with and through Moses? 3 months go by since they leave Egypt. And Moses and the people of Israel make it to Mount Sinai, where Yahweh has further plans for Moses. At Mount Sinai, Exodus chapter 19, verse 10. What did God allow Moses to do? Guys, we still call it the Mosaic Law, the Law of Moses. There'll never be a day in all eternity when this man's name isn't on the tongues of men. The Lord said to Moses, Moshe, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments and be ready for the third day. For on the third day Yahweh will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. So God uses Moses to lead the people Israel in one of the greatest events in Israel's history. I mean, you could say that about so many things. One of the greatest events, the greatest event. Israel has been so blessed of God, but here Moses gets to be the one who is handed the tablets of the law by God and gets to carry the tablets of the law down to Israel so that they could obey the law forever. When God had finished speaking with Moses upon Mount Sinai, He gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony. Have you ever touched those? How many in Israel touched those tablets? Just Moses. No human hands ever touched those original writings of God. He gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written by the finger of God. What an event! And who got to touch them? Whose hands did God put them in for safekeeping? Moses. And don't forget, while we're talking about all these things, about the miracle of the manna that Moses oversaw, the miracle of the manna. For 6 days you go gather. On the 6th day you gather enough for 2 days. All those instructions, all those miracles came through the man Moses. Remember the quail that flew in from the east one night. Remember the water from the rock. Did the water just pour out of the rock, or did Moses have to strike the rock once? And at another time, did Moses have to speak to the rock? Moses, God used Moses as the agent for all these things to occur. One man, look at everything God did through Moses. The greatest contribution that Moses ever gave Israel, these are my words, not anybody else's, was this place right here. The tabernacle. The tabernacle of God, the worship site, the place where God Himself would dwell. God allowed Moses to see the blueprints, the heavenly blueprints of this building. Only the eyes of Moses ever saw it. Look what it says in Exodus chapter 25, verse 8. Let them construct a sanctuary for me. These are God's, this is Yahweh speaking to Moses. Let Israel construct a sanctuary for me, that I may dwell among them. Moses gets to build the place where God will dwell among Israel. According to all that I am going to show you. Who's God going to show the blueprint to, the pattern? Moses. Wouldn't you love, I'm a builder. I would love to see how it is that God showed Moses these things. According to all that I'm going to show you as the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furniture, just so, exactly as I show you, you shall construct it. Who got to be on the mountain that day, learning about what was going to be constructed, the place where Yahweh would live, would dwell among Israel? Moses. Moses. The greatest contribution in my mind to all of Israel for all time was that Moses got to build the house of God on earth. Astounding. And Moses had the privilege of overseeing the construction of the most sacred item in all of Israel. What was that? The most sacred item in all of Israel, not the tabernacle. What was the most sacred item in all of Israel that Moses got to oversee Bezaleel building, carving, making out of acacia wood, covering it with pure gold? It was the Ark of the Covenant, where God would dwell above the mercy seat. They shall construct an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. You shall overlay it with pure gold inside and out. You shall overlay it, and you shall make a gold molding around it. The holiest artifact in all of Israel has always been the Ark of the Covenant. Remember the movie? It's been 40 years now. I'm getting old. Indiana Jones. What was the name of the movie? The Raiders of the Lost Ark. The world has always wanted to know the whereabouts of Moses' ark. Where is this original golden acacia wood overlaid with gold item where God existed? Where is it? Nobody knows where it is. The ark. The ark. And what does God say about the ark? There I will meet with you. And from above the mercy seat, that mercy seat is where the cherubim are there with their wings outstretched, touching each other. The top layer underneath the wings is the mercy seat, where one day a year the high priest would go in on the Day of Atonement and sprinkle the blood. There I will meet with you. And from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim which are upon the ark of the testimony, I will speak to you. Where does God dwell on earth? Right there, specifically and exactly right there above that box that Moses had the privilege to oversee the building of. Who saw God's vision of the box? God's pattern of the ark in heaven? Only Moses. And he comes down to tell Bezaleel and his friend Aholiab, this is what you shall build. I've seen it. This is what it will look like. I can't do it with my hands, but God's given you the spirit of wisdom. You build it. I'll show you how. I'll tell you precisely and exactly what I saw, and you build it. Moses gets to oversee the building of the greatest artifact Israel will ever have, the Ark of the Covenant of God. The Ark. There I will meet with you. There from above the mercy seat, I will speak to you about all that I will give you in commandments to the son of Israel. The last thing that we'll say this morning in these highlights of Moses' life is Moses got to erect the tabernacle. Not only did Moses see the pattern, the blueprint, the plans for it, but Moses got to erect it. The first time the tabernacle ever stood on earth was because Moses oversaw the erecting of the tabernacle. What else did Moses get to do? Moses got to kill the first sacrifices at the tabernacle. Not Aaron, Moses. What else did Moses get to do? Moses took the blood of the first sacrifices. Read this in Leviticus. It's all there very clearly. Leviticus chapter 8, if you want to really have a chapter of where this all happens. Moses kills the first animal. Moses takes the sacrificed blood of the animal and he sprinkles it on the bronze altar. He goes inside the holy place and he sprinkles it on the table of showbread. He sprinkles it on the menorah. He's consecrating all these things for the use, for the worship of God. He consecrates by sprinkling the blood, the altar of incense. He goes into the Holy of Holies and sprinkles for the first time in all of human history. Moses sprinkles blood. Moses. What else does Moses do? He sprinkles blood on his brother Aaron, the high priest, and on Aaron's sons, the priests of Israel. Moses did it all. Moses consecrated the priesthood. Moses consecrated the tabernacle. Moses consecrated the items in the tabernacle. So you wonder, how is it that God can make a statement since that time? No prophet has risen in Israel like Moses. All you have to do is look and see what he did. What God did through this man Moses could never be repeated. Aside from Jesus the Christ, no one has come close in Israel to doing what Moses did for the people of Israel. No one has come close. Look what it says. Our last verse. Numbers chapter 12. Now hear my words. God speaking. If there is a prophet among you, I, Yahweh, shall make myself known to him in a vision. I shall speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my household. Can you imagine these words coming out of God's mouth about you? About me? Moses. He was different. He is faithful in all my household. With him and only him I speak mouth to mouth, even openly, and not in dark sayings. And he beholds the form of the Lord, that no one else ever saw. Not Aaron the high priest on the Day of Atonement. No one ever laid eyes on what Moses saw. And when Moses came out, as you know the story, as I said earlier, his face would shine. And he'd have to put a veil over his face. Can you imagine if my face just all of a sudden looked like I had a light bulb in my mouth and it would just this radiance coming out from a man? Never happened in the history of the world. It happened with Moses. He beholds the form of the Lord. Why then, he asks Miriam and brother Aaron in Numbers chapter 12, why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant, against Moses? Who comes to the protection of Moses? You read in the Psalms these places where God is the deliverer of the righteous. God will never see a righteous man beg for bread. God delivers the righteous. God saves the righteous. God defeats evil at the feet of the righteous. And here you see it in action. God comes to the defense of Moses when Miriam and Aaron are trying to supersede, trying to get some authority for themselves. God himself comes and says, Moses is like no other human who will ever live. How is it that you aren't afraid knowing what you know about Moses, to speak against my servant. Moses. What more can you say about Moses? One more thought, and I'll close in prayer. In Hebrews chapter 11, by faith Abraham, by faith Noah, by faith Moses. When you read the section on Moses, he's got more by faiths than anybody else. By faith Moses did this, by faith Moses did that, by faith Moses also did this, and by the way, by faith Moses also did Moses, top of the list. Top of the list in Hebrews chapter 11. He doesn't come first, but he's the top of the list. By faith Moses is more said than by faith anyone else in the book. The one who God himself comes to the aid of face to face, Moses. I hate to leave and turn the page to Joshua, but such is life. We turn the page to Joshua next week. Let's close in prayer.